Welcome to Issues That Matter. My guest today is Scott Ritter and Diane Sayre, and Diane is a candidate for the United States Senate. So let's let's go back a little bit and talk about uh, the ballot access. It was Andrew Cuomo who raised the bar from 15,000 signatures to 45,000. Can you give our viewers a little overview of exactly why that was done, in your opinion?
Why it was done is to make sure there's no dissent. If you're going to plunge the nation into potential nuclear war and economic collapse, then it behooves the ruling parties, which seem to have the one area they agree is on plunging us into war, to make sure there's no dissent and to make sure that there is no voice of opposition or anyone who could raise any questions. And I actually put out a statement asking whether the suppression of my campaign is the prelude to nuclear war. Um, Now, their alleged excuse for this is that they are creating a $100 million slush fund for matching funds in the US elections. And they said that they are so concerned about the taxpayers' money. I know many New Yorkers may not realize it, but the legislature purports to be very concerned about how they spend your money. And therefore, they don't want to waste any matching funds on frivolous, they use the word frivolous candidates. Now, as a federal candidate, I am not even eligible for these matching funds. And the matching funds don't even kick in until 2024. But nonetheless, they tripled the petitioning requirement. And I will tell you, the 15,000 signatures was already so onerous. You might remember when John McCain was running for president, he was a major Republican Party candidate. He was unable to even get the 15,000. So they take something that's already difficult and tripled it. And as a result, the Libertarian Party, which has actually won 107 different elections in New York over years, the Green Party, which has won a number of elections, long established minority parties,
Mm-hmm.
neither of them was able to get this requirement.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it turned out that I was the only person in the state who was able to get on the ballot through this outrageous method. And I did submit 66,000 signatures, and they were of a high enough quality that no one even challenged them.
When your campaign first reached out to me and they told me that you had garnered those number of signatures, I thought, wow, Howie Hawkins, who's been involved in politics in New York State for many years, who's running on the Green Party line for governor this year, he wasn't even able to come close to that. And I'm thinking, if Howie can't do it, how did Diane do it? So, can you give us a little overview of how you did it? I mean, that's a daunting figure.
Well, I have to tell you, I actually don't like the way I did it because I only had 200 volunteers and I had wanted to get 400 or 500, um, because we knew we had no room for error and we couldn't be below 2,000 signatures any day because there's a time limit. So people
Mhm.
had to work very, very hard. I had the advantage, as you know, of having worked with Lyndon LaRouche for 30 years, and we had successfully gotten him on the ballot twice in New York. So there were a handful of older stalwarts, because the last time I think was the 2000 election, so that was quite a while ago. But we had a handful of people who knew the crazy legal, picky details who were able to help. But it was largely a new network of volunteers. And I told them at the beginning, I said, you can't pay people for this. I'm not hiring petitioning firms because what we're going to have to do is impossible. And therefore, you're not going to clock in and clock out. There's not going to be a time when you can cut. You can't say, I'm not doing it because it's raining or it's snowing. I mean, the first day of petitioning was April 19th. I was on my way to Buffalo and they had these big signs over the road, heavy snow expected. So the first day we're in a snowstorm and you couldn't, you had to get the 2,000 signatures every day or not make it. And we made a focus, actually nuclear war. When people would ask the petitioners or ask me, well, what does she stand for? I would say, I stand for that we are in danger of a nuclear war, and that's not a good policy, and it's not going to balance the budget. And then often also, interestingly, people would say, what party? Independent. I'm not with the parties. I'm with LaRouche. And they'd say, oh, thank God, I just left X party. I just left the Democratic Party. I just left the Republican Party. I'm so fed up. And I think it was that message and also the realization among my supporters that we have a real danger, that they were willing to go the extra mile. I mean, it really wasn't easy. They had all these crazy things. Imagine they used COVID as an excuse for why you can't stand in front of a store and petition. So grocery stores that we've been able to do 20 years ago, you'd go there, talk to the manager, and they'd say, oh no, sorry, our headquarters said since COVID, no one is allowed to be in front of the grocery store. So it was just every kind of imaginable hurdle. I mean, sometimes you resorted to guerrilla tactics. You just go to one grocery store, only talk to people as they were leaving, and pray that no one went in and told the management you were out there, last as long as you could, and run to the next grocery store. I mean, that's what people were doing, and that's how we did it. And I know that people in the Libertarian and Green parties were actually very disappointed that I did it, because they have been involved in legal cases saying that this is impossible. Now, if I succeeded, it demonstrates that it's not impossible, but I would be the first one to join them and say it is impossible. No one should be required to do this. For 6 weeks, I did nothing except worry about the petitioning. I did not speak at any event unless I knew I could get at least 100 signatures there. It was all consuming. We weren't able to raise funds during that time. We worked on raising a lot of money going into it so we could I mean, even though I didn't pay people to petition, it cost about $80,000. I had 3 lawyers. We had to put gas in the cars. We had to rent housing, and I mean, it's just an outrageous requirement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. So you got on the ballot. From the time you got on the ballot till the time the blacklisting came up, what time frame are we looking at?
Well, let's see, I submitted the petitions on May 31st, and then they had this whole challenge period, and I forget what the date was, maybe about 10 days later, it was clear that I was going to be on the ballot and not be challenged. So that would be June. The meeting of the Center for Countering Disinformation in Ukraine was July 14th.
Okay.
That's when they released the first kill list, which had 72 people on it, including myself, Scott Ritter, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, Tulsi Gabbard, Rand Paul, others. And we didn't really find out about it till August, because they didn't have, the names were sort of done as an image, so you couldn't really find them on search engines in that way. So the meeting was July 14th. We learned about it in August and began taking action. And I think Scott's letters to the New York delegation, as published in Consortium News, were actually very important in terms of a leading initiative against the idea that the US Congress would be voting to send money to an agency which was seeking to silence, that is, to crush First Amendment rights of American citizens, and not only violate their First Amendment rights, but put people in danger of physical harm.
So, Scott, you were on the list as well as Diane. So, share your views on the whole blacklist situation.
Well, before I do that, let me focus on one thing that Diane spoke of. The single issue that she raised to get on this list, the single issue that motivated 66,000 New Yorkers to sign their names to a petition, was the danger of nuclear war. And here we are today on the brink of a nuclear conflict. I don't know if your listeners know this. Right now, there's a NATO nuclear exercise taking place that is literally practicing to drop bombs on Russia. Now, Russia responded with their own nuclear weapons exercise that is literally practicing to drop bombs on NATO. The difference here that Russia does not have a doctrine of preemption. The United States does. Joe Biden ran for president saying that one of the first things he'd do is ensure that there was a statement of sole purpose, that the only purpose of America's nuclear arsenal was for deterrence, and we would only use nuclear weapons in retaliation. Hey, Joe, what have you done? Nothing. And right now we have a situation where NATO is practicing the use of employing American nuclear weapons at a time when America has a doctrine of preemption that's been in place since the Bush administration, uncontradicted by anything this president said, and at a moment when the Ukrainian president, whom we've elevated to be, the modern version of Winston Churchill, King Leonidas, has openly called for NATO to launch a preemptive nuclear attack against Russia as a means of deterring a Russian nuclear attack on Ukraine that no one's talking about but the West. So the reason why I bring this up is, wouldn't it be nice if Diane Sare was on the stage with one of the most powerful men in America, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, who is singularly empowered to ask questions about national security, to stare across the desk at Joe Biden and say, what about that sole purpose statement, Joe? Wouldn't it be nice if Diane was there to represent those 66,000 New Yorkers, their names on a piece of paper, and said, this is what we believe in. This is what we want. This is important to us. And it's a discussion that should be had, not just here in New York with Diane taking the lead, but throughout America, which is why it's imperative we get people like Diane put in positions of authority where they can bring this issue to the forefront. But instead, she's denied access. But it's not just denied access. She's denied access and placed on a blacklist. But it's not a blacklist. It's a hit list. It's an assassination list where she could be killed. And it's not an idle threat. There are lunatics right here in the state of New York, Ellenville, where they have a statue erected to Stepan Bandera and 4 other Nazi-supporting Ukrainian ultranationalists dating back to the Second World War. And every year they hold torchlight parades in honor of this guy. These people live here in America. We live in the day and age of political violence. And somebody like Diane Sare, who should be on a stage with Chuck Schumer debating nuclear war and the future of the United States and the world, is instead having to worry whether or not one of these lunatic fringes are going to take action because she's been put on a list funded by the United States government, supported by the United States government, sustained by the United States government. And even though we've brought it to the attention of Chuck Schumer and everybody else, they're doing nothing about it. That's the crime. Again, Diane, I'm not a political person, and I can't sit here and say, I endorse Diane Sare for Senate. I can't do that. I wouldn't endorse anybody for Senate. But I'll tell you what, I endorse your presence on the stage. I endorse your message. And I endorse the fact that you alone seem to understand what's important to this world, and that is having a future for our children, for our grandchildren, and their children, and generations following, the future that we denied everybody if we have a nuclear conflict. So I want you on that stage, Diane. I want you speaking out on behalf of the people of New York. And it's just a darn shame that they're silencing you in this manner.
Well, have you contacted Spectrum News, and what was their reaction?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Yeah, and just so to be very clear, because I don't know that we've gone through it. So there is a debate scheduled for October 30th at 7 p.m. with Chuck Schumer and Joe Pinion, the Republican nominee, who I've reached out to through intermediaries, who has refused to debate me without Schumer, and who says he is not going to take a position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict because he wants to stay on message, whatever message that is. You don't take a position on the major threat to civilization at the moment. Yes, people from my campaign reached out to Spectrum News, and their response was, oh, no, it wasn't an oversight. We have a standard. Not only does she have to, leap through hoops and do crazy things to get the 66,000 signatures, only to be blacked out by the mainstream media, but she has to have a showing of at least 15% in our polls. So now I had a little hint about what was going on because a couple of my supporters had called in to report that they had been called by people polling, who are you voting for US Senate? And they would say Diane Sayre, and the pollster would say, oh, we're sorry, that's not on the list. You have to choose from Schumer or Pinion. So I'm supposed to be getting 15% on a poll where they're not allowed to say that I am their choice of candidate. And we went ahead and were able to get the questions being asked from 3 of the 4 polling agencies, just so we're not going on hearsay. And it's absolutely the case. My name is not included in the polls that they are using to determine who gets to be in this debate.
It's breathtaking. This whole thing is breathtaking. And the average person has no idea of the mechanisms used to keep independent voices off the main stage. And, I don't know what it's going to take for people to wake up and realize that. But when we're on the brink of a nuclear war, you would think that the time is now, wouldn't you?
I would, and I'll tell you what is interesting is there are some breaks coming from certain leftist organizations and people who've been active around Julian Assange and people who've been active around Bernie Sanders. My schedule, interestingly, is getting completely out of control. I'm having multiple events and interviews going on every day. I even got on WABC, although it was a program from 1 to 5 in the morning. But I was interviewed for about 25 minutes by Frank Morano, who said that he always likes to interview independent candidates. And when he heard that I wasn't being included in the debate, he decided to include me, and he wanted to discuss the Ukraine situation. He introduced me by saying, this candidate has a completely different take on Ukraine and Russia than what you're getting from the news media. We spoke about the hit list. We talked about LaRouche. He said, many people told me not to have you on because you were an associate of LaRouche and he's a cult leader and crazy. And what do you have to say about that? Gave me an opportunity to talk about LaRouche's work with Reagan to try and prevent a nuclear war by developing a laser technology to give us a way to make nuclear missiles obsolete. And that apparently was a great crime for which LaRouche was not forgiven. The interview ended somewhat abruptly when I said that most of the world believes that the US blew up Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, but he did play that part of the interview. So there are a lot of people who want to hear what I have to say, not because of me per se, but because people are actually very, very alarmed about the danger. I also wanted to report what I found of great interest when we had our second rally outside of Schumer's office. I had a 10-foot banner, so not subtle, which had a picture of Schumer on one end and a picture of Stepan Bandera and the Azov little wolf-spangled symbol on the other end. And the banner said, why is Schumer supporting Nazis in Ukraine? Mm-hmm. And I actually thought people were going to freak out or threaten to beat us up, and maybe because we had about 50 or more people out there. I didn't get anything like that. And I think actually many people know that we're arming Nazis. I mean, we did have 40 congressmen in 2018 write a letter saying we shouldn't give money to the Azov battalion and neo-Nazi groups. People do know this, but the narrative is so controlled by the media that I think people don't dare to say what they know because they're afraid their neighbor may look at them cross-eyed, even though their neighbor may think the same thing. And I think that's why they have to, or they're going to try very hard. I intend to get into this debate. I'll tell you, I'm not accepting this. I intend to get in there somehow, to make it such a scandal in the US and internationally that they're forced to include me or cancel it altogether. We'll see. But I think that's part of the fear. The truth has a certain power to resonate in a crisis, and they can't afford to have someone telling the truth, because everyone will say, yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I agree, but they haven't dared to give voice to it themselves. It requires leadership.
So, the Senate Majority Leader is Jewish, but yet he's supporting the Nazis in the Ukraine. I find that so hard to comprehend. Scott, what do you think?
Well, here we go. One of the most difficult issues to talk about in America today is the Jewish issue. Look, Americans and Americans and American. I don't care what your religion are. You're an American. I don't care what your color is. I don't care what anything. If you're a citizen of this country, you're an American, as far as I'm concerned. But you have to be consistent with the values you adhere to, that you claim, that you purport to represent. Chuck Schumer has run famously on his Jewishness. He speaks about his support of Israel. He talks rightfully. He has supported policies about the Holocaust and fighting Holocaust denial, ensuring that never again is something that's taught here in New York schools. I mean, there's a law that it has to be taught in New York schools, that you can't minimize the role of the Holocaust. So why in God's name, Chuck, are you supporting the very people who killed Jews in World War II? I don't understand it, Chuck. There's literally no consistency here. There's nothing but hypocrisy. You either stand for something or you don't. And you don't stand for anything, Chuck, because if you did, you would never support a government that puts Stepan Bandera as their national hero, who elevates the sickening ideology of Ukrainian ultranationalism that's responsible for the deaths of thousands of Jews. Look up Bobby Yar, who pulled the trigger. You know who gave the order? Look up who pulled the trigger. Look it up who slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Poles, hundreds of thousands of Russians. Stepan Bandera is a sickening figure. And anybody who supports him or supports a government that treats him like a hero is a sickening individual. And Chuck Schumer, you fit that definition.
Do you think that the desire of the American government to crush Russia is more overwhelming than their heritage if they're Jewish? What do you think?
That's a difficult question for me to answer, because that's only something that Chuck Schumer can answer. I would say that politics oftentimes overtakes integrity. And clearly Chuck Schumer is a politician. And look, I'll be frank, Chuck Schumer doesn't know a damn thing about Russia. So I can't sit here and tell you that Chuck Schumer honestly is pursuing a policy of crushing Russia. He doesn't know what Russia is. He doesn't know who Putin is. He doesn't know anything about our policy. If Chuck Schumer was put on the stage with someone like Diane Sare, he'd be left to be a bumbling idiot when asked to address in a substantive fashion some of the underlying issues pertaining to the potential of nuclear conflict between Russia and the United States. So I can't sit here and say that Chuck Schumer believes in a policy. Chuck Schumer is a politician who knows he cannot contradict the policies of the president of the United States when that president is a Democrat. So that's why Chuck is doing it. It's purely political. It has nothing to do with underlying values or beliefs or sentiments, whereas Diane does take a moral position on nuclear weapons that is firmly founded in her deep understanding of U.S.-Soviet, U.S.-Russian relations. It would be amazing to see somebody of her caliber on the stage able to present these issues to somebody like Chuck Schumer, where the New York audience could watch. I just wonder what would happen in an election where Chuck Schumer's supposed to win overwhelmingly because, oh my God, we all love Chuck, only to have him exposed as this dumbest man on the planet when it comes to the things that matter most, the survival of our children, our grandchildren, our way of life. Diane is the candidate that could bring that out, and I just certainly hope she gets on that stage.
Dennis, I have neglected to say hello to you. Do you have any thoughts?
I think uh, what's being said is very, very, very clear. I would just like to point out to people that are watching this that many know now about an intervention against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that was done by one of Diane's campaign staffers, and it sort of blew up all over the internet. You know, there are now over 25 million people in various countries that have seen this. And here's what's interesting. People simply responded to what was said by Jose Vega. Jose Vega is a young man from the Bronx that has intervened and asked questions of Kamala Harris, of another congressman by the name of Bowman, who's up from the Bronx, and AOC. That's what he does because he believes that you're supposed to hold the Congress accountable or the president. You go and you talk to these people. And what has happened is some people have tried to attack what he did. And what his response has been, where's everybody else? You know, if you don't like the way I did it, what about you? Why don't you do this? This is a point of life and death. We're talking about thermonuclear confrontation. I mean, he's enough, you know, he points out he said, you know, I was like 2 years old when 9/11 happened, you know, so I don't have any memory of the United States really before 9/11. But I'm looking at this country in which I'm told about, and he knows something about the lethal nature of the weapons, but he knows something about the Bronx. He knows something about having tried to get AOC to help on housing conditions in the Bronx and having questioned Kamala Harris on how you're going to have all this money going for wars and none of the money going to develop employment for people. So I would just say that it's going fine. This is all on my only comment that's needed in what has already been stated is that what Scott talked about when he said, I'm not going to sit there and tell you I endorse Diane. I don't know a lot of things about, but I endorse that she's got to be on that stage. That's America. That's the whole, if people began to take that position and not just take it, advocate that, you would deal with most of the divisiveness in America right now. Because half of the problem for the reasons that people are so divided is they don't know what the other person is saying. They never hear the other person. They're never in a position to actually have the ideas discussed in a way which is intelligent. And most important, what we're looking at right now is there's financial matters here. There's the impending financial collapse. There's a lot of things driving this war that have nothing to do with Ukraine. And I believe that that if we, in fact, go to the American people and allow them to hear Diane and allow them to hear that discussion, they will see that these people and this war is not right. Americans should not be in it. We should not be paying for it, and that people will pull out of it. And that's what the concern is.
Diane, would you say that because you've been shut out of the debates, you don't have much media coverage, that Chuck Schumer can get away with doing the things he's doing just because he knows that nobody's gonna talk about his accountability?
Well, you know what? I believe that our universe is just. So whether it's now or later, Chuck Schumer will find that he is held accountable for what he's doing. So I don't think he is going to get away with it. Whether he gets away with it right now, I'm not sure, because I can tell you that people really hate him. People are fed up. They want every incumbent, you know, he's been there since close to the Civil War, I think, and as has Pelosi and a whole bunch of people have been there for what seems like centuries, or as Dennis was describing, Jose Vega, who's what, 23 years old. Schumer's been in the Senate longer than this guy has been alive. So he's already being punished. I actually find it amusing that me, with my meager resources, I mean, we've done a good job and people have contributed generously, but I certainly don't get any dark money and don't have millions of personal dollars to put into this. With an all volunteer staff, limited funding, clearly I am the most terrifying political candidate in the state, because the lengths they have gone to try and silence me and not allow me to speak and not allow people to know me. And I would say people should not be disheartened, because believe me, the bad guys, the ones running this policy, know me very well. That's why I'm on the hit list. They know me very well. It's the regular population we have to reach, which is what they want to prevent. Obviously, if you have a policy that's jeopardizing the lives of the majority of the population, what you depend upon is keeping them divided, keeping them debating stupid, petty issues that have no real relevance in the future, and not allowing them to unite on the major life and death issues that will affect their future.
So, what did the next 3 weeks look like for you, Diane?
No sleep. It's just, I'm going from one event to the next. I'm hoping to actually be able to pull in some more funds to be able to do more billboards and radio ads and things like that. I'd like to puncture the blackout. As I said, I intend to get into this debate. I mean, every bit of pressure we can bring to bear on Spectrum to make a scandal out of this, including international press. I was interviewed actually by someone in the UK this morning, and clearly they have a similar problem there. And he was telling me about a friend of his who tried to run for parliament. And there they have something about equal time where all the candidates get to be on television. Well, his friend was given 6 seconds. So it's, it's similar. I actually proposed on that show because I noticed I have so many followers on Facebook and Twitter who are in the UK, New Zealand, Australia, that perhaps those of us who are victims of the Five Eyes regime should really unite much more consciously to shut this down. So the next 3 weeks are going to be, a challenge, a straight out sprint. But I also have to say that I'm not disappearing after November 8th. How could I? We have too much on the line, too much to lose. And my campaign is pulling together a phenomenal movement. I just participated in a conference on Saturday of 100 20-year-olds who are concerned about the green agenda, the Malthusian idea of shutting down energy and the impact it's going to have on third world countries, and why we need nuclear power and why we can't have a nuclear war. And they are very active and they want a future. So this will be a sprint through November 8th, a quick breath to regroup, and then to continue to fight. Or maybe we'll make the breakthrough and I'll get on there and mop the floor with Schumer, which would be really fun, and something else will happen.
So, yeah, that would be very interesting. I'd love to see that. So, if anybody wants to volunteer for your campaign, send you a contribution, knock on doors, make phone calls, how could they reach you?
The website is SARE, and that's just 4 letters, SARE, forsenate.com, sareforsenate.com, and people can sign up there for everything. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter and Telegram and even TikTok, I have to admit.
Great. So, does anybody have final thoughts?
Beyond wanting to see Diane Sayre on a TikTok video, no, I will say this, that I will do everything I can, Diane, to help you get on that debate. I have limited means, but it's so important, as Dennis said, that democracy doesn't exist unless all views are heard equally and given equal time to participate in the debate, discussion, the dialogue that makes, that empowers an audience. And that's an audience that's empowered with knowledge and information becomes an informed constituency, and then suddenly we start electing the right people to office, and America functions the way it's supposed to, and problems get solved. And wow, that's where we're at. Instead of what's happening, which is we continue to elect the same stultified, special interest controlled dinosaurs into office, and nothing changes, and people lose hope. And when in a democracy, when the people lose hope, it's over, because we're supposed to be government of the people, for the people, by the people. And when you remove the people from the process, what are we a government of? I don't know, but I wish you the best, Diane, and I will do everything I can to help you out.
Great.
Dennis, have any final thoughts?
Yes, I say just this. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the very anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which began, if you take the 13 days between October 16th and October 29th, there's a larger period of time. But that's the period that everybody talks about. And that's what we're in right now. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the American people, different people, young, old, whatever, confronted every member of the Congress and Senate and asked them the question, why are you doing nothing to prevent us from going to thermonuclear war? What's your motivation for supporting this? And then if those kinds of interactions became the basis of what people around the world saw America as, think about the effect on all kinds of people all over the world. They're always told about how democratic processes in America are the example for what they're supposed to do in their countries. What if that really occurred? I think that's something clearly in the power of each American, in whatever way they can do it. I mean, obviously people are limited in certain ways and some people are not. Young people don't have the same limitations, for example. They have a lot of time, they have a lot of energy, they have a lot of capability, and they, more than anybody else, should hold these people accountable, because they've come into a world which has been defined by a kind of process of war, as Scott's already, and he knows very well. It's a process he tried to stop back in the 90s, before we got to the World Trade Center and all the other things. So I believe that that's what we could do. And I hope that Diane's example and Scott's example, Jose Vega and Kyan Thistlewaite's example, all these people, that this inspires that in the next days.
Wow, really great. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and we have 3 weeks to go, and I'm sure, Diane, we will be talking again. So you've been
Thank you.
listening to Dennis Speed, Diane Sayre, and Scott Ritter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter, and if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.